This is the Passive 25K podcast, a podcast built around the vision of creating wealth through passive income for ourselves and others. The idea of creating income while you sleep seems like a dream come true, but for most professionals, turning this into a reality is a different story. On this show, you will hear real people breaking passive income streams down to the basics, giving you the next steps to start your own passive income journey. If you're new to the show, my name is Kyle Reedstrom from Fargo, North Dakota, where I get to work with my team of agents and investors each day to complete our goal of $25,000 a month in passive income. Now, let's get right into our next conversation. This is the Passive 25K podcast with Kyle Reedstrom. This is episode 10. We are talking to Gary Boomershine today. Super excited to have you on the podcast, Gary.
It's great to be here. I know we've been talking about getting me back on the show, and super excited to share a lot of value and a little bit of my journey in real estate over the last 35 years.
Yes.
Hard to believe, but the
Gary,
markets are constantly changing.
It's fair to say you've seen real estate in this country over the last 3 decades. You've seen every single nook and cranny of real estate. Is that fair to say?
You know, and not only that, I'm actually in California, which is insane right now. But yeah, the huge ups and downs. My quick story: I grew up in a family out in San Francisco, or outside of San Francisco, about 40 minutes, and grew up in a real estate family, an entrepreneurial family. My parents owned a brokerage in the Oakland Hills. It's called Piedmont, Montclair, real kind of prestigious area, and it's called Boomershine Realtors. My name just happens to be Gary Boomershine. And I was a licensed agent 3 weeks after turning 18, as the youngest of 4, and actually paid for college by holding open houses and door knocking and cold calling. And then they had a fleet of rental property. And so, you know, on the weekends, I'd come down and help them, you know, paint and rent out the properties. But what I really learned was the entrepreneurial spirit of actually how to basically build a business that works for you. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, because I think I'm super excited. A lot of people get lost in both real estate agency business and also in real estate investing. And I have a new book that's coming out. I know we'll talk a little bit about it. I'm going to be back here in a couple of months on the next show releasing it. It's called The Freedom Code.
Yes.
But it's really, a lot of people get hung up and they are chasing rainbows or chasing unicorns. They get into real estate for financial freedom and a lifestyle, right? To actually have a life. And what they end up doing is just creating a really bad job for themselves. So we're going to be talking pretty quickly around how I look at this whole business. I always look at it, it's all passive income, but there's 3 buckets. There's cash now, there's cash flow, and then there's cash later. So cash now it's really, you do some work, you get a one-time payment, right? That's a JOB, a job, and I call a JOB just over broke. It's great. That's wholesaling. If you're on the real estate investor side, that would be wholesaling. It'd be rehabbing. It would be fix and flip. If you're an agent, if you're typically like a real estate agent, that's going to also be, right? You're going to do some work and you get a one-time payment, maybe some referrals off of it. Cash flow is really the passive income. And how do we do that? It's usually owning a rental property, and also something that I think everybody should be doing is private lending. So I've been doing that for a decade as well. It's how to be like the bank. And then there's cash later, which is really around how do you ultimately become rich. And that's in, you know, taking advantage of appreciation. Also, when you have tenants that are paying down mortgages and you get all the benefits of depreciation, et cetera. So there's cash now, cash flow, cash later. And a lot of people get into this business and they just need cash right now. And they think, okay, I'm going to go generate and I'm going to go become a realtor first. And then I'm going to wholesale or, you know, buy a rental property, and then ultimately an apartment, and then ultimately be a lender. And I've seen very few people actually make the jump. Instead, you want to be thinking day one around those three buckets. And I would also be, focusing not on, oh, I need to have $10 million in my bank account. You really just need passive income, mailbox money every month.
Yep.
You can depend on without ever doing anything. You do the work one time and you get a lifetime of payment, right? So, and I love 25,000, by the way, is about the amount of money that most people, including in California, could have a very, very happy life. Mm-hmm. So, and it took me decades because I got into this business. I got into so I was a licensed agent from 1987 until 2005. And then I went full-time real estate investing. And my attorney basically told me I was having too much fun. I really didn't want to list properties. For me in California, it was like shooting fish in a barrel. And I started in kind of buying pre-foreclosures back in the day and bought a lot of them. But my attorney basically said, Gary, you're really just representing yourself. You're not trying to list properties anymore. And he goes, you really probably should get rid of your license. And you're held to a higher standard in California. And so I did that and never looked back. So I was a real estate agent for 18 years. And then I've been a full-time real estate investor for, I think it's 18 years as well. So
there you go. Man, Gary, I love that you touched on so many things that our audience is looking for. We have so many audience members that are thinking about making that jump you talk about. They're having aspirations or vision around what you talk about with cash now, cash flow, or cash later. And so many people find themselves stuck in the exact spot that you said, I need cash now to do anything, right? And so I want to talk to you about that real quick because you've seen this all. Like you even played the agent role, which I'm not sure I even knew that. I always thought you were like, nope, I don't want to be an agent. But that was your beginnings. How the cash now aspect, you're seeing people, that's a whole separate business. That's the transaction world. And you essentially need that. You needed that to get started. But how do you rip that Band-Aid off and go into what really matters, the wealth builders, which is passive income through cash flow, and then the cash later aspect, which is what you just last touched on?
Yeah. Well, and this is a big part of the book, which is you want to figure out the why and the what, not the how. Everybody's focused on the how. So the why and the what, why real estate at all? Why not technology or why not crypto? So why real estate? And then what do you want real estate to do for you for short-term and long-term? And a lot of people get lost because they want to jump to instant gratification and they want to know the how. So they'll go to seminars or they'll hire coaches on how do you do a rehab or how do you do a fix and flip. And, I always tell everybody, if you're a general contractor, are you going to just come to a project with a hammer and your whole project is going to be off of a hammer? Or are you going to have equipment, you're going to have people, right? And you're going to have power tools, et cetera, et cetera. And when I look at real estate, I'm always looking at the three buckets. Like a lot of people, they'll go and they'll say, oh, I'm going to buy rental properties and I'm going to be a single family rental property, or I'm going to buy properties I'm going to rehab. I look at how can I maximize the return based on this property. So I'll give you an example. My wife and I, for kicks, we actually sold everything. We decided to completely liquidate. We were going to leave California altogether. So about 18 months ago, we lived in the San Francisco Bay Area. We were tired with the masked Nazis. I'm probably not supposed to say that, but I'm in California. So we decided that we were going to leave the state of California. We sold everything, gave a lot of stuff away, packed a 16-foot pod, and headed to the mountains. We loaded up 4 cars, and we ended up where we're at right now, and absolutely love it. But we unloaded every piece of debt that that we had. I have a lot of owner financing properties, and so we've kept all those. And I do a lot of lending. Anything that's good, good debt, I kept. But anyway, we got up here. This is a gold mine area, so I went and found 3 properties. Okay, the one I'm in now, which is kind of an interesting one. We bought this. It was on the MLS. Bought it through a realtor, which I don't do very often. Usually, my technique that I've done for a long time is I usually buy direct from the seller, and then I usually sell it with a realtor and get the maximum amount of money. That's typically how I do it. But we ended up finding this property, 2 acres. Then bought it. We were gonna, we put $35,000 into it. It needed some floors, it needed some painting and decorations, and turned it into an Airbnb. And it was awesome. It was in and out. I think this place is already appreciated like 150,000. And so anyway, that was one. I ended up buying another one off of direct mail, off of the REI Vault service that you're aware of. But it had there's a little A-frame. The value of that property as is was about $225. I bought it for $145. So all cash. It had a bad tenant. So a little secret for everybody. You're buying problems, not properties. So that's how I get the biggest discount. So it was an older lady, it had been a rental property. It needed a lot of work. So we came in, we looked at that property. We put $60,000 into it, bought it for $145, and turned it for $339. We got we closed on it like 4 days ago, which is awesome. It was $100,000 profit in that deal. So we bought it for all cash.
Yeah.
Supposedly it had a bad tenant. I love bad tenants, by the way. If you find a property that has a bad tenant in it, you can make a ton of money. You get a huge discount. I've bought properties with bad tenants. I've sold those same properties with those tenants that are now paying, because I've guaranteed their rent. I'll guarantee their rent for 6 months to another investor buyer. So that one we actually fixed up. That was a cash now deal. Part of it is the analysis was this particular property that we bought. We didn't want to turn it into a rental because of the demographic that we would have gotten. We're looking for really low maintenance. And then I picked up.
So that was better to liquidate, you're saying. That was kind of like, hey, for that reason, that was the maximizing of your dollar in that situation.
It was a cash now. This property that we're in right now, that's the Airbnb, that's a cash flow, cash later. And then I bought an owner financing property, which I think is, when the market turns, that's going to be a very sweet spot for a lot of people to make a ton of money. Most people, especially agents, have no idea you can do this. But I bought a property from a seller. I actually got it a little bit below market. $325,000. I put $35,000 in cash down, so 11% down, and I got a 30-year, 2% interest loan from the seller. And even if you actually amortize that loan, it was a $290,000 carryback, seller carryback. Backed in first position, and I have all kinds of extra really great things that I can actually substitute collateral and cross-collateralize and all these other great things. That's probably for a podcast for 2 hours, right?
I think everybody's head is like got little sparks going off like, oh my gosh, Gary, we want to know more about that.
So this one I got a $290,000 amortized loan at 2% is about $1,100 a month payment. So the deal that I constructed, I'll share this before, $800 a month for the first 3 years, $1,000 a month for the next 7 years, and then for the remainder of the loan, which is 23 years, I think that works out, or 20 years, at $1,200 a month. So, and a lot of people would be like, why would a seller do that? Well, she she owned the property free and clear, super, super savvy lady. And she had a lot of rental property, and she took on responsibility for guardianship of a great granddaughter, and she's older, and she didn't want to have to pay capital gains. So a lot of sellers, they want the benefits of the real estate. They just don't want the headaches. And so this was a great property that my wife and I are turning into a long-term rental.
Man.
And so that's a cash flow, and definitely a cash later.
Yes. Yeah. And I hear the simplicity yet creativity that you used. And I love that you plugged the book. We're super excited about the Freedom Code, which Gary's in the process of just finishing up. And we can't wait to have him back to talk about the book, the Freedom Code. You guys are going to love it. I've got a little sneak peek. Selfishly, I'm kind of excited that you let me look into it. But one of the concepts you talk about in there, Gary, is seller solutions, and that is something when we've talked in the past, Gary, I am just astounded at the way that you interact with sellers and the way that you create solutions. And in this deal specifically, this is exactly what I'm seeing again. So was this something that you obviously got the story from her, Gary? You said, I understand what you're going through. I understand that you might have some motivation here. Here's a vision for a way you could sell it and avoid. Is this all you, or was it kind of coordination?
My background, I talked about being in real estate, but what I didn't tell you is I took a little detour. So I was a licensed agent and did that in my part-time, but I grew up right in the Silicon Valley heyday, and I got a computer engineering degree and really good mentorship. And I went into high-ticket enterprise software sales and learned the concept of solution selling, or consultative relationship-based selling. And what I see is most people, they're breaking every single rule of sales. People buy and people sell based on trust and respect, and number one. And so solution selling, it's you build a relationship, you have to establish trust, and then you create a solution to your customer's pain. And you always honor your customer. So somebody's a customer. So for me, I have two customers. I have the seller typically, and I also, if I'm raising any money, my investors. I'll just tell everybody, you're like that is absolutely gold. You should honor them. You should treat them well. And I probably keep in contact with every seller I shouldn't say every seller I've sold to, but I sold software back in 2002, and I still go skiing with this guy on an annual basis, like 25 years later. So it's a relationship, and so I am not going in and trying to lowball somebody, because I know the competition's going to do that. I will, I do a little bit more of a disruptive approach, and a lot of sellers, I'll send out direct mail, and they'll call up and they'll say, are you just some investor that's going to lowball me on my house because I'm not looking to sell my house at a huge discount? And I'm like, Mark, I totally understand. How about $1 million? And let's say the house is worth $250,000. And this is one that I actually put in my course on the sales side. But I said, what about $1 million? I said, Mark, I have no idea what your house. Nobody knows the value of your house more than you do. I'm like, if I could buy your house and make a modest profit somehow, some way, and you'd be happy, and it's a win-win, and I'm not losing money, then I'm your guy. And if not, I got a lot of resources and connections. I'd be happy to help you, and just send me a thank you letter if I help. Is that fair? And it's a conversation, and a lot of people are, it's like, oh, you got to get to the offer really fast. I always slow it down. I'm like Columbo. So, there's an old rule of sales: 3 no's equal a yes. I actually have changed it in real estate. I think it's 5 no's. So when I hear a no, I'm excited. I got to the first one. Only 4 more to go. So here's the other thing. People don't realize, especially real estate investors, their number one fear is over even over death, is fear of rejection. And usually it's men. They don't like rejection. And sales, the actual true concept of sales does not start until there's a rejection. So it's really interesting. You get a lot of people they're fearful, and all it is a conversation, and active listening, asking really good open-ended questions, and getting to a solution that's a win-win for the seller, and ridiculous follow-up.
And you found the solution here with a sliding scale for income for the seller. I hear a win there for the seller a little bit more as the income's going up over time, right? You get a 30-year amortized seller carry back at 2%. And that's you get the property, you can cash flow that property. That's what you'll do, right? You'll be able to make the cash flow, and you get a nice long time with only 11% into the deal. So there's the win-win. Was there any back and forth on those terms?
Yeah, it was a beautiful thing. I have this. I will be releasing. I have an advanced. It's really focused for real estate investors. I have a lot of agents that are coming into the program because they don't know. They're fearful. A lot of people are fearful. They're agents, and they're fearful around getting into the real estate investor game. And I'm telling everybody should be doing it. Everybody ultimately should be owning some real estate. And you don't have to be doing 100 properties a year. You can buy one or two. And in the book, I tell everybody, everyone's 14 houses, single family houses, of being completely financially free.
Yeah.
And it's 14. And I run the math of how to do it. And even my daughter, I have a 22-year-old daughter, and she's already out looking for properties because she knows over the next 7 to 8 years, that's how she's going to be becoming wealthy, is the passive income, not the job.
Yeah.
Right now in this market, about 1 out of 10 of those properties are owner financing. Okay. So it's not like, it's 10%. When the market slows down, I will see that changing. The market slowdowns usually give great opportunities, but since this is a seller's market, in most areas of the country, I'm in California, stuff never actually even gets a for sale sign in the front yard.
Yeah. What's the reason there, Gary? Why is the owner financing going to be on the rise? I think people's ears are perked here.
Well, probably interest rate rises.
Yeah. the cost of money is more expensive. Let's not do business with the bank in that sense.
Yeah. And most people think, there's a do not sell clause but there's also a federal law called the Garn-St. Germain Act, 1982, that if you follow the right procedures, you can actually buy any property subject to an existing loan with owner financing, et cetera, et cetera. But let's see, the conversation I had is, her name was Sharon, 75, and I just asked her a little bit about her story. And she actually had a great-granddaughter that was born out of a drug addiction, and like super high, like when she was born. And so Sharon ended up taking full-time the custody of our guardianship of the great-granddaughter. And so she said, look, I got these properties. They're all free and clear, but I really just don't want them. But I'm going to have this huge capital gain issue. So I just asked her, I'm like, what would you like, Sharon? Like, walk me through your ideal scenario. She actually told me, she goes, I'd love a way where somebody could buy the property, but I didn't have to pay this huge capital gain all up front. And I said, okay. And then I said, how much are you netting right now on the netting after all of your costs, et cetera? And she hadn't raised the rents on this place in like 12 years. I think the guy was paying like $1,100 a month. And we're doing a rehab on it right now. We're gutting it. And we actually may put a manufactured home in the back because it's a huge lot. but we'll rent that place for like $2,200 a month, $2,300 a month.
Wow.
So I asked her numbers, and she said, I already knew, but she was netting about $700 or $800 a month.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I came up with the 800. So I said, Sharon, why don't you put together your list, and why don't we meet for coffee tomorrow? And so she came in, and I said, we talked for a little bit about family and life, and then I said, so tell me, what did you come up with? And she told me, she goes, I was thinking 2% interest, and I was thinking purchase price of $325, and I was thinking I'd really like somewhere between $800 and $1,000 a month. That would be really ideal. She rolled those things out, and I already knew that was a no-brainer. Usually I do zero interest, by the way. A lot of people will say, oh, you can't do that, because CPAs will tell you can't do that. That's not actually accurate if you know how to actually buy the properties correctly. So I get a lot of properties that I buy zero interest, because the interest is actually ordinary income to the seller. So sometimes they like a higher price and giving up the interest. But at the end of the day, it's just a relationship. I'm just asking, active listening. It's called ARA. It's one of the I have this in the Freedom Code and also in the sales course. ARA is ask or active listening. What that means is it's 80%, 75% of our interaction with sellers should be active listening. Active means you're not thinking of what you're going to say while you're listening to the seller. You're actually actively listening to them and really taking it in 75% of the time. Then you're repeating, the R is you're repeating what you heard. And then the A is ask questions. So it'll be something like this. It'll be like, Sharon will kind of walk me through something. I'm like, gosh, Sharon, you know what it sounds like? It sounds like what you're looking for is X, Y, and Z. And I might actually spin them, a little NLP technique, a little bit, and add a few other things, right? I got to get the dogs out.
No problem. And actually, I want to come back. We're going to take a little break, and we'll be right back, because we were just getting into some good stuff. So we're going to take a little break, reset, and we'll be right back. Hey, wanted to take a quick break from this week's episode. Wondering if you ever ask yourself, how do I get started in this stuff? Or if I'm already doing it, what are some next steps, or people that are doing the same thing that I want to do, people on this passive income journey? Well, we were getting that question, and we created a community of passive income investors called Passive Income University. This is a place where you can watch videos, things that we've done, where we put tools and information, where we've built a community of people that can communicate, ask questions, and grow together to start their passive income journey. And eventually we complete our passive income journey together. If you're interested in more info on Passive Income University, check us out at p25kg.com. Okay, we are back here talking to Gary Boomershine on the Passive 25K podcast with Kyle Reedstrom. We've gotten some great nuggets so far. Gary, we love hearing some of the actual examples that you're going through right now on some of the deals you're doing. We were just diving deep into an owner finance deal you were doing with a gal named Sharon. The way you structured it was just, I think it's things we've never heard before. But this is a common thing where you are letting the seller be the bank. And you've also talked, and you mentioned earlier, and I think some ears perked up, was what happens when we are the bank? When you're the bank. And I think that's such a far-fetched thought. I think so many people are like, cash now. But you mentioned a topic that I think can be such an amazing stream of passive income someday for so many of our audience, so many people in our audience. Can you start to touch on how that works for us to be the lender, and how that can start to look?
Yeah, for sure. Before I jump into that, the big picture in all the years I've been doing real estate is this whole system is rigged to keep us enslaved. Okay. And that's why the 8-hour, the 40-hour work week, that actually came from Henry Ford. So everything that we've actually done, we do to this very day is really indoctrination to be part of a cog in the system.
Mm-hmm.
And so, cash now and everybody jumping in and trying to like get instant gratification is what we've been trained. And you have to unwind that. That's why fundamentally there's cash now, there's cash flow, there's cash later. It's all at the same time. You don't say, oh, I'm going to go do this step one, and then in 5 years, then I'm going to go do the next thing. Nobody really gets there. They get stuck in the muck, and 95% of all real estate investors are out of the business in 5 years. They got lost. And so, I almost got lost because I did the same thing. So those are the three buckets. Whenever I'm buying any kind of property, I'm always saying, how can I maximize those three buckets? And sometimes it goes in the cash now, just like this property. And we don't do any of the work, by the way. We always manage a team. That's another thing. A lot of people will go and try to do some of the work themselves. It's the worst thing to do. You always want to hire. You want to use the understanding of leverage, not just leveraging money, but you want to leverage other people's time and energy and expertise. So the second thing is, a long time ago, I learned that you want to think like a banker. If we look around every street corner in the world, what are the biggest buildings, right? You don't see real estate office or real estate brokerage. You see banks, right? Bank of America. Why? Because the business model works. And so if we look at a real estate investor, or even an agent and then we look at a lender or banker. So what does a real estate investor have to do? They have to go find the properties. They have to learn all the systems. They have to learn the contracts. They have to hire a team. And then they have to go find the properties, usually door knocking, cold calling, direct mail. They do a lot of coaching. They're flying around and spending a lot of money. And then finally, if they get it down, they got to buy CRMs. They got to have systems, right? Cold calling systems, text messaging systems, marketing systems. And then they find that deal, right? And now what do they have to do? Now they have to go and get some money. So they go over to the banker who's on the other side. And who writes the rules for finance? Is it the investor or is it the banker? It's the banker. The banker basically will say, hey, big down payment, and we want your credit, and we want your firstborn, and we want everything collateralized, right?
Yep.
So then, now all of a sudden the investor has this deal. Now the fund starts. They got to go fix it up. They got to deal with all the problems. And then who's the last to get paid in a transaction?
The investor.
The investor. Who's the first to get paid? The lender.
Bank. Yeah.
So here's the big, the way the banking system works. A real estate investor goes out and has to find a piece of collateral, an asset that they're going to use as collateral to borrow the money. It just happens to be real estate. It could be anything, right? And the lender does the same thing, except they fill out a piece of paper called a loan. And as long as somebody will sign the dotted line and they have an asset behind it, the bankers leverage that piece of paper for the money. So the banks, the lenders don't use any of their own money. So banks by definition they don't offer, like if you look at federal law, they're servicing agents. So Wells Fargo, Bank of America doesn't actually, they're just servicing loans for somebody behind the scenes. So they look at real estate investors to do all the work, take all the risk, right? And the lenders are the ones that make all the money. So, and also investors typically are always looking at the upside and taking high risk. Bankers are always looking at the downside. So that's why thinking like a banker, every single deal that I look at, I'm always coming in and saying, how can I actually make more passive income? The game is not having money in the bank. It is consistent cash flow for life, right? And
yes,
a bucket of $500 here a bucket of 1,000 here. And so the game of lending, like it takes about an hour for me to fund a deal. I don't talk to any borrowers. I work with other hard money brokers or private money brokers that bring me the deals. And I usually am the guy that actually funds them. I'm super conservative on them. I'm only doing first position loans. So I wouldn't do any seconds in this market. Mm-hmm. And I'm usually, at 50 to 55% loan to value. So I'm not taking enormous amounts of risk. So my downside is really it's a hedge against a downturn. So my worst case scenario is, market crashes, I have to take back a property and I'm getting it for 50 cents on the dollar, maybe 60 cents on the dollar. I don't really care. I'll buy those all day long.
Yeah. Okay. And there's so much hunger out there that you're finding. If you start looking, you start to find ambitious people that are looking for to borrow funds to continue to fund that high risk investing activity that we've talked about the other side. It's just so interesting to hear you talk from the bank mentality of how there's a constant viewpoint of the downside of investment and minimizing risk, when on the investor side, we're constantly looking at the potential and taking on the highest risk. And that's just, how can someone get into this from a start? Because you're where you're at and you're seeing, and the concepts you're explaining is totally sound. Like, it makes complete sense. You drive, I know there's a bank on each end of each block that we're sitting on right now. So how do you start this? How do you get into this game?
Yeah, I actually had a course, got it to Inc. 500 fastest growing company list. It was called the Banker's Code. From 2009 to about 2013, 2014, it was an insane market for doing this. We were teaching people actually how to do what's called hypothecation. It's really how the banks make money. The banks don't use any of their own money. It's insane. It's of how it works. They're hypothecating paper. And so we were showing people how you could do the same thing legally. It was called the Banker's Code. And George and I, my business partner, we really created the whole rehab lending market. And the problem that happened, though, as the market starts to turn, like it always does, money became super cheap, because back then there was no money. So the deal flow was crazy. The properties were everywhere. 2008, 2009, 2010. If you were a rehabber and you had cash to go buy properties, you made a fortune. Right now, finding those deals is a little harder, but the money is super easy. And so, but it was called the Banker's Code. There's a book out there. I'll bring it back when the market turns. I think Lee Arnold is a guy that teaches a lot of this stuff. His stuff is really good. Some point, like I said, I'll come back when the market is ready. Mm-hmm. I'm sure I'll have something in the Freedom Code on how to do it. It's in the book. It's really not that hard. You got to have some money. So you really, in this particular market, you can't become a lender with no money. You have to have some. Yep. You want to really focus on first position loans, and you really want to follow the rules. I always go through a licensed broker or an attorney in a title company. So I never doctor my own paper. There's a lot of people that make a lot of mistakes, but it's not very hard.
Yeah. So I want to kind of role play this a little bit, Gary. Let's say I'm coming to you and I say, Gary, I got an opportunity. There's a property near NDSU in Fargo. I know it's worth about $250, and I know I can get it for, I got it at a discount, not a crazy one, but I can get it for, $200, and I can put 10 into it, and then I can really transform it, and I can, and then I'm going to keep it as a rental property. But I don't want to go to the bank for whatever reason. I don't want to go to the bank on this. Okay. Right. So I want to come to you and say, hey, I'd like to do this project. What can I do to?
Well, I'm probably not the best because I'm not funding a lot. I'm really specific on where I'm lending.
Okay.
I'm lending on absolute no-brainers. So in this market, I'm still anticipating a kind of a change in the tide of this euphoric stage of real estate. I think we're going to see a period of time where, properties aren't selling like they sell. Everybody thinks this
Yeah.
is a new normal. No, this is a typical stage in real estate. It just has gone like 7 years longer than it should have. It's always been a 7-year cycle. I think we're at year 14. So now I do fund projects like that occasionally, but I'm usually doing debt and equity financing. So somebody will come and bring a deal that I'm actually going to do some funding on, but I'm also going to take a piece of back end profits on those
Okay.
deals. So, I, but 200,000 with $10,000 in rehab, and you're going to turn it into a rental, you're getting a $50,000 discount. I think that's pretty awesome. There should be plenty of money. I like IRA money. I like friends and family to get started.
Okay. So you're saying people dip into their IRAs to fund, because that's a thing you can do, right? So
Yeah.
and everybody's got one of those these days, right?
The last I heard, it was $13 trillion in self-directed IRAs. $13 trillion. Most people are in self-directed IRAs because that's alternative investments, not just, Wall Street and the fraud that goes on there. So they can invest in, gold and silver. They can invest in real estate. They can invest in loans. And so what's amazing is you can come in and show them a potentially better vehicle to get a better return than they're doing off of Wall Street. And a lot of people are really nervous about, the Wall Street and the banks. Love real estate, and there's a ton of money. I would say most of the money that I've raised historically has come from 401ks, self-directed IRAs, and pension plans, like doctors and lawyers.
Okay.
In fact, one of my favorites, I'll just tell real quick, came off of a postcard. So I've sent out, with REI Vault, we sent out over 90 million pieces of direct mail. So we've done a little bit of direct mail. But I sent out a postcard, and I got a phone call from a guy that was intrigued because the postcard, it was called our third notice postcard. It was our shock and awe postcard. So his name was Ari, and Ari called me up and said, "Gosh, Gary, I've been a real estate investor for 40 years, and I was just really, I don't want to sell anything, but I'm really intrigued on your postcard. I want to find out who you were." And so I engaged with him. We went out and had coffee, and I walked him through what I'm doing, and the guy lent millions to me. I shouldn't say millions, but north of 7 figures. So it's a great way. Everybody in this business should be a referral or a relationship, whether they're selling a house to you, or they're going to be a buyer of a house from you, or they're going to be a referral partner for you, or some connection. Everybody should be a contact and a referral.
And I mean, is it as simple as, okay, so let's say my parents have been in a professional career path, they're retired, or they're not quite retired yet, and let's say they have a 7-figure, retirement IRA, whatever it's in, right? And you're saying, and I want to get in started investing, and that they're sitting here happy, they're excited about it. They believe in me, right? So the simplicity there is, I'm going to borrow the money from that party that's engaged with me, and there's a high trust, high respect relationship going on there. I'm going to borrow it at a smaller, a stable, small interest rate that's a win-win. And then I'm going to borrow it from them, and then I'm going to go borrow it out more aggressively, like you're talking to investors. That's kind of the system I'm picking up here, Gary.
Yeah. My nephew came and said, "Uncle Gary," he goes, "I want to do real estate." He's at Texas A&M in engineering. Yep. And he said, "I really want to ultimately buy real estate. I just don't have any money, and I probably won't have any money for a long time. And how do I do it?" And I said, "Eric, you don't need any money. That's such a fallacy. You do not need an agent license. So he's like, I'm thinking about becoming a real estate agent. I'm like, you don't need to be indoctrinated into listing people's houses because that has nothing to do with making money as a real estate investor. And so it's all about buying the property. It's the location, and go get the deal. The money will come to you. And then I walked him through. I walked him through what to do. And I'm like, hey, guess who's going to probably fund your first deal or your first 5 deals? Probably your parents and me, and maybe your grandma. And here's how it'll work. You're going to have to sell us on it, right? But you got a great track record. And I'm like, what we'll probably do is we'll probably be looking for maybe a 6.5% return and a piece of the profits, of the net profits. So the first deal, you're probably going to end up giving up, since you're not putting any money into the deal, you're probably going to be giving up about 50% of the profits plus a 6.5% interest rate. And just go find the deal and then bring it back to us. So you don't use any of your own money. And I said, so your first deal, then you're going to go into the house, you're going to probably fix it up a little bit, and then you're going to bring in all your roommates, and you're going to learn how to actually have a rent-free property. And there's going to be some build-up for you on the next house. You're only going to make 50%. You're going to go find the next one, right? And the next one, I told him that he'll probably refinance out of the first one, pay everybody back, and do it again. And now he'll have some of his own money on the second one. And so he won't have to give up 50% of the profits. He may give up 30%. So after 3 properties, he's off on his own. I'm like, it's the end of the day, you really don't need, I didn't even know. It was really funny. From 2004 until 2013, I didn't even know that you needed cash to buy houses. I never made all cash offers. Everybody's like wholesaling, and you got to go find a cash buyer. I'm like, I hated that model. It's like I've been buying properties with owner financing and creative deals from the beginning, and there's like creative financing, and it will come back. This market's been insane, but there are so many different ways to buy real estate. You can pay a higher price. You can do contracts for deed and lease options. And
you've talked a lot about subject to the existing mortgage. You and I have dove deep in that. You've shared a video with me that I thought was fascinating on how you're keeping the current mortgage in place, and then and that falls under the owner financing category, well, and kind of owner and bank financing category. But that was a whole eye opener to me as well, Gary. I know you've done a handful of that, or a lot more than a handful.
Owner financing, just taking over. There's an assumption of the mortgage, and then there's what's called subject to, which means the mortgage still stays in the owner's name, and it's not transferring over. You're just making the payments. Well, there is some downside, because if you stop making the payments, that impacts the seller's credit. The opportunities, though, are amazing. I'll give you an example just really quickly. I bought a property. This is in Fort Collins a few years ago, and it was a 4-acre property with this duplex on it, and it had probably like 8 cars. They're like 2 feet into the ground. They were shot, but they like literally melted into the ground. We had to dig them up to get them off the property. I mean, it was just full of junk. And there were the drug addict kids. I think there were heroin addict kids that were like living in this house. It was a complete junker. So I got a call from the seller. He lived out of state. His wife had died of cancer. These were his kids. He felt really bad because they were now deadbeat heroin addicts. But he was running into financial problems, and he really wanted to get out of the property. So I asked him, I said, so Henry, what are you looking for? Now, when I ran the math, when I looked at this property, I'm like, if I buy it and I'm wholesaling it, I'm probably only going to make like 10 or 15,000 bucks. So I said, and he wanted 20,000 net because he had a mortgage on it. And I said, Henry, let me ask you a question. What if instead of me paying you the 20 grand right now, which is really going to be almost impossible. I'm like, what if you allowed me, say, 60, 90, 120 days I'll make all the mortgage payments and cover all the costs. I'm going to go in and do some fix-ups. And then when I sell the property, I'll give you the 20 grand. And he goes, wow, that would be fantastic. So I bought the property on the front end. I did it subject to an existing mortgage. He carried back his profit of 20,000. And I made a couple payments. I think I made like $2,000, $3,000 of payments. I put a garage door, because there's no garage door on this thing. I pressure washed it. I cut down a bunch of trees, and I got the garbage off. I think I was like 14, 15 grand into this thing. I put it on the market, and we ended up, it was insane. Somebody was going to buy it for an apartment complex. And I think we ended up grossing, before, commissions to my team, et cetera, $150,000. So I basically what I did is I basically bought it subject to a little bit unique paperwork and skills. And I controlled the property. And then 90 days later, we sold it full price retail on the MLS with a realtor.
You're able to get that money back to him. He's able to exit. Yeah.
Oh
my gosh.
I actually called him. This is one of my favorite stories on building a referral and testimonials. So I called him and said, Henry, I got great news for you. And he goes, what? I'm like, you're getting a wire transfer today, but I'm actually wire transferring you a lot more than the 20 that I promised. I think I gave him an additional 20 or 23,000 bucks on top of that. He literally like teared up. And I said, I just have one request. I'm like, I'm a guy that wants to sleep well at night. And I want you to know that I want to know that I did the right, honorable thing. And I'm happy with the profit that I'm making. So I just said, a lot of people don't know me, especially if I'm sending them direct mail. And there's a lot of scammers out there. And I'm like, would you be a testimonial for me if I'm with the seller and you get a phone call from me? Will you take that call and tell the seller your story? So he's been one of my best references for, I don't know, 5 or 6, 7 years.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh man, Gary, this I can't tell you how much I value, and I know our audience values the examples you've shared, your work you've done in the real estate investing, and just the mentality you carry with trusting and respecting sellers and people in general in this sharky investor world we live in. I think it's such a breath of fresh air. And then the knowledge you've built. And then what I love about it is you have such a high level of knowledge, but you bring it down to simplicity and you just make solutions with people, and you make it fun. You make it sound like, you're sending people profit share on some of I know that doesn't happen every deal, but it's just a really cool testament to how you do business. We have so much more that we could talk about. And I cannot wait to unleash some of the key points in your book, The Freedom Code, that's coming out very soon. And that'll be our next one that we talk about. But I'm just going to hype that up right now. The Freedom Code by Gary Boomershine is definitely something you got to check out. But we're going to wrap this up, this conversation. We're going to cut some stuff short because of time. But I want people to I want to ask you how people can find you. How are people kind of follow what you're doing and some of the courses and resources that you've shared during the podcast?
Yeah. I have not really publicly announced this, but I actually sold my business recently, which was called REI Vault. Some people knew us as realestateinvestor.com. We're the largest direct mail marketer in the real estate niche. And we had a huge phone team that actually did all the qualifying of leads. So we would do the direct mail for some of the hybrid real estate agent teams and investors all over the country. But been doing that since 2005. And then I had a 40-person staff that actually did all the screening and follow up. So it was awesome. I just sold that to a company that's been doing the actual mail part of it, and they're growing like crazy. So I'm actually officially on a sabbatical. I'm actually exiting. And I try to do this, every couple of years, but I'm going to take 3 to 4 months off and go to the mountaintop. I'm taking realestateinvestor.com, and I do plan a pretty substantial new business model off of it. And I'll be launching the Freedom Code and also the sales program. I've got an advanced solution selling. It's actually a 1-month program that may include a 3-day practicing event that I'm super passionate about. So I'm disappearing. I'm going to go off to the mountaintop for a couple of months. I would say maybe September, October, I'll be back.
Okay. Well, hey, I love that. With lots to look forward to with Gary and what you're working on. I know there's going to be some amazing things coming out of this time you're taking. And we're super excited to come back around and talk about the Freedom Code. Gary, thank you so much for being on the podcast. You've been someone in my life that we met at a conference here in Fargo. You came in and we were just magnetized to each other. And you've already taught me so much about real estate investing and all of the nuggets you put in just this podcast and your book. I'm so excited that you're sharing with the world. So thank you.
That's awesome.
Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. Awesome. Thanks, Kyle. And for all of your loyal listeners, take care, everybody.
Yes. Thanks so much. This has been the Passive 25K podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future conversations. Also, tell us what you thought by leaving a comment below on today's topic. If something really hit with you, don't be afraid to share this with someone else that's interested in passive income. Thanks again for tuning in. I'll catch you next time for another episode of the Passive 25K podcast.